"Why is your daughter wearing that sign?" A woman whispered behind me as I stepped into my ex-husband's backyard, and for one horrible second, I thought she had to be talking about someone else. The Holloway family reunion was already in full swing when I arrived that Saturday afternoon. White folding tables stretched across the lawn beneath strings of warm patio lights, even though the sun hadn't gone down yet. Children chased each other between flower beds while soft country music drifted from outdoor speakers near the pool. It looked like one of those perfect suburban family gatherings people post online to prove their lives are happy. I had almost turned the car around before coming. Daniel had invited Lily and me 3 days earlier through a short text message that simply said, "Mom wants everyone there this year." Nothing else. No apology for ignoring Lily's last 2 birthdays. No acknowledgement of the awkward silence that had settled between all of us after the divorce. Just an invitation written like an obligation. Lily sat quietly beside me during the 40-minute drive from my apartment in Cedar Grove to the Holloway estate in Fairfield County. She spent most of the ride staring out the passenger window, twisting the sleeve of her pale yellow cardigan around her fingers. At 10 years old, she had already learned how to make herself small when she felt unwanted. "Do I have to stay the whole time?" she asked softly as we pulled through the iron gates. "We'll stay long enough to be polite," I told her. "Then we'll leave." She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tense. I should have listened to that feeling in my chest right then. That heavy pressure warning me something wasn't right. Instead, I parked near the fountain in front of the house Daniel grew up in and told myself this afternoon might finally be different. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe people had calmed down. Maybe Margaret Holloway had finally grown tired of blaming me for every crack in her perfect family image. The second I stepped out of the car, I noticed how quiet it suddenly became near the patio. Conversations didn't stop completely. They just lowered enough for me to feel it. Like everyone had seen smoke before a fire starts. Daniel stood near the grill wearing khaki shorts and a navy polo shirt, laughing at something his cousin said. He looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago when we were still married. Same haircut, same expensive watch, same habit of pretending problems didn't exist if he avoided eye contact long enough. He glanced toward me once, then immediately looked away. That hurt more than I expected. Lily reached for my hand as we walked through the side gate into the backyard. "Dad didn't answer my text this week," she whispered. "He's probably busy," I said automatically, even though I was tired of making excuses for him. Then I saw it. Lily froze beside me before I even fully understood what I was looking at. A large white poster board hung around the neck of a little girl standing near the hydrangea bushes beside the fence. The sign rested crooked against her chest with thick black letters written across it in permanent marker. "Family disgrace." My brain refused to process it at first because the little girl wearing it was my daughter. Lily's breathing stopped. I felt her fingers tighten around mine, so suddenly it hurt. Several adults nearby noticed us staring, but none of them looked shocked. A few looked uncomfortable. Others looked away completely. One woman took a sip of iced tea like nothing unusual was happening. Lily's lips parted slightly. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the word. That was when Margaret appeared beside the dessert table wearing an expensive cream-colored linen dress and pearl earrings. At 68, she still carried herself like she was hosting political fundraisers instead of backyard barbecues. "Oh, good," she said calmly when she noticed me. "You finally made it." I stared at her. "What is this?" Margaret glanced toward Lily as if she'd forgotten the sign was there. "A lesson," she replied. "Children should understand when their behavior reflects poorly on the family." I felt something cold move through my chest. "She's 10 years old. And old enough to learn consequences," Margaret said. Lily looked down at the grass, her cheeks turning bright red while a group of teenagers near the pool pretended not to stare. I searched for Daniel. He was still standing near the grill, still not moving, still saying nothing. Our daughter stood in front of his entire family wearing a sign calling her a disgrace, and he couldn't even walk toward her. Slowly, carefully, I crouched beside Lily and untied the rough string from behind her neck. Her eyes were glossy with tears she was trying desperately not to let fall. "Did Grandma make you wear this?" I asked quietly. Lily hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "She said Dad would get upset if I didn't," she whispered. Around us, music continued playing softly through hidden speakers. Someone laughed near the pool. Ice clinked against glasses. The Holloways carried on with their beautiful summer afternoon, while my daughter stood humiliated beside a flower bush like some kind of warning sign. I folded the poster board in half without taking my eyes off Margaret. She remained perfectly calm, perfectly composed, like this entire thing had been reasonable. "You always were too sensitive, Claire," she said lightly. "That's been your problem from the beginning." I almost answered her, almost gave her the confrontation she probably expected. But then I noticed something strange through the dining room window behind her. The large family photo wall inside the house had been rearranged again. Every recent picture of Lily and me was gone. For a few seconds, I could not stop staring through the dining room window. The Holloway family photo wall had always been Margaret's pride and obsession. Every holiday portrait, every graduation picture, every carefully staged Christmas card framed in polished silver or gold. When Daniel and I were married, Margaret used to spend entire afternoons rearranging photographs so visitors would see exactly what kind of family she wanted them to believe existed. Perfect children, perfect marriages, perfect grandchildren. But now the spaces where Lily and I should have been looked strangely empty. Not obvious enough for strangers to notice immediately. Margaret was too careful for that. Instead, newer photographs had been shifted slightly wider apart to cover the missing gaps. A beach trip from last summer where Daniel stood beside his cousins without Lily. A Thanksgiving portrait where someone had clearly cropped me out. Even Lily's second-grade school picture that used to sit near the piano was gone entirely. It felt less like we had been forgotten and more like someone had been quietly erasing evidence we were ever part of the family at all. "Claire." Daniel's voice behind me sounded tired instead of concerned. I turned slowly. He held a paper plate with a hamburger bun in one hand like he had interrupted an ordinary conversation instead of watching his daughter humiliated in front of 30 people. "Can we not make this into a scene?" he asked quietly. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I suddenly realized how deeply broken his sense of normal had become after years under Margaret's control. Lily stood beside me, twisting the edge of her cardigan sleeve around her fingers again. She kept her eyes down toward the grass. I knew that posture. She used it at school concerts when she thought nobody wanted her there. "A scene," I repeated carefully. "Your mother made our daughter wear a sign calling her a disgrace." Daniel exhaled heavily, glancing toward the patio where Margaret was now serving peach cobbler to relatives like nothing had happened. "She was trying to teach accountability," he said. "Lily should not have spoken to Grandma that way last weekend." I stared at him. "She is 10. She embarrassed my mother in front of guests." There it was again. Not concern for Lily. Not concern for what this would do to her. Only concern for Margaret being embarrassed. Daniel had spent so many years protecting his mother's feelings that he no longer recognized when everyone else was being hurt instead. Lily finally looked up at him. Her blue eyes were already glassy with tears she refused to let fall. "I only asked why Grandma never puts Mom in the family pictures anymore," she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. He looked away first. That tiny moment shattered something inside me more completely than the sign itself had. My daughter had not been punished for bad behavior. She had been punished for noticing the truth. A warm breeze moved through the backyard, carrying the smell of grilled corn and freshly cut grass. Somewhere near the pool, children burst into laughter during a game Marco, but it sounded strangely distant now. Like Lily and I were standing behind invisible glass, while life continued normally for everyone else. "I think we should leave," I said quietly. Margaret's voice floated toward us before Daniel could answer. "Leaving already?" she asked with polite surprise. She approached slowly, balancing a dessert plate in one hand. Up close, her makeup looked flawless despite the July heat. Not a strand of silver hair out of place. Margaret Holloway believed appearances were more important than honesty. They always had been. "The family has barely seen Lily all summer." I folded the sign carefully in half again. "You lost the privilege of talking about family the moment you hung this around her neck." Several nearby conversations softened into silence. People were listening now even if they pretended not to. Margaret lowered her dessert plate onto a nearby tablecloth without breaking eye contact with me. "You always did encourage oversensitivity," she said calmly. "That child needs structure before she grows up repeating your mistakes." "What mistakes?" I asked. For the first time all afternoon, Margaret hesitated. Just briefly, but I saw it. A flicker behind her eyes. Daniel stepped forward immediately. "Enough, Claire." His voice sharpened with warning. Not toward his mother, toward me. Lily moved closer to my side. I could feel how tense she had become. No, I said softly, still watching Margaret. I would really like to hear what mistakes Lily is supposedly paying for. Margaret picked up her glass of iced tea with steady fingers. Some things are better left in the past. Then she smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just politely enough for outsiders to think she was being reasonable. But I knew that smile. I had seen it during our divorce mediation when she sat beside Daniel whispering into his ear between meetings. I had seen it when she convinced relatives I was unstable because I cried after losing my teaching job during the separation. Margaret never raised her voice. She simply poisoned rooms quietly until everyone else started breathing it too. Mom. Lily tugged gently on my sleeve. Can we go home now? Her voice sounded so small that my chest physically hurt hearing it. I nodded immediately. Yes, sweetheart. Daniel rubbed his forehead like he was exhausted by all of this. Claire, do not do this in front of everyone. I looked around the backyard one more time. The expensive patio furniture, the spotless flower beds, the smiling relatives pretending not to stare, and beyond the dining room window, the missing photographs. You already did this in front of everyone, I said quietly. Then I took Lily's hand and walked her toward the gate. Nobody stopped us. Nobody apologized. The only sound behind us was the soft clink of silverware against dessert plates and Margaret's calm voice resuming conversation like nothing uncomfortable had happened at all. But halfway to the car, Lily suddenly stopped walking. She turned back toward the house with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not sadness, not confusion, fear. Mom, she whispered. Last week Grandma told me something. I knelt beside her carefully. What did she say? Lily swallowed hard. She said I was never supposed to exist. The drive back to Cedar Grove felt longer than 40 minutes that evening. The sky outside the windshield had started turning soft shades of orange and gray, but inside the car, everything felt strangely cold. Lily sat curled against the passenger door, hugging her backpack against her chest without speaking. Every few minutes I glanced toward her, expecting her to cry or ask questions or finally tell me everything Margaret had said to her over the past few weeks. But she stayed quiet. Too quiet for a 10-year-old. The folded poster board rested on the back seat beside her dance shoes like something poisonous I had accidentally brought home. Halfway through the drive, Lily finally spoke. Are you mad at me? The question hit me so hard I almost missed the stoplight turning red near Maple Avenue. I looked at her quickly. Why would I be mad at you? She shrugged without lifting her eyes. Because Grandma said families fall apart when children ask questions they are not supposed to ask. I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. Outside, a teenager crossed the street carrying grocery bags while traffic rolled slowly past us in the humid July heat. Everything looked painfully normal while my chest felt like it was slowly cracking open. You did nothing wrong, I said carefully. Do you understand me? Lily nodded slightly, but I could tell she did not fully believe it. Margaret had spent years planting tiny poisonous thoughts inside her. Small comments disguised as discipline. Little corrections disguised as concern. Looking back now, I could suddenly see all the moments I ignored because I wanted peace more than confrontation. The first time Lily came home from the Holloway house asking if her curly hair looked messy compared to her cousin's. The time Margaret laughed during Thanksgiving dinner and said Lily had inherited my dramatic side, unfortunately. The Christmas morning when Daniel bought expensive gifts for his nieces, but handed Lily a bookstore gift card inside a plain envelope because Margaret said, too much attention creates spoiled children. At the time, I convinced myself those things were small, harmless even. But sitting beside my silent daughter now, I realized cruelty rarely begins loudly. It grows slowly inside ordinary moments until one day a child is standing in a backyard wearing a sign around her neck while adults eat peach cobbler nearby. When we finally reached my apartment complex, the parking lot lights had already turned on. The building looked tired under the evening sky. Peeling white paint near the stairwells. Old flower pots outside doors where retired tenants tried to make the place feel cheerful. After the divorce, this two-bedroom apartment had been all I could afford on a substitute teacher's income. Daniel once told the court Lily deserved more stability than this place could provide. But tonight, for the first time, I realized stability was not measured by square footage or gated neighborhoods. It was measured by whether a child felt safe when she walked through the front door. The second we stepped inside, Apartment 2B. Lily kicked off her sneakers and disappeared into her room without asking for dinner. I stood alone in the kitchen listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of someone vacuuming upstairs. My body felt exhausted, but my mind would not stop replaying Margaret's words. Some things are better left in the past. And then Lily's voice in the parking lot. She said I was never supposed to exist. I opened the freezer mechanically and pulled out the mint chocolate chip ice cream Lily usually loved after difficult days. The carton stayed in my hands for several seconds before I realized I was not actually preparing anything. I was just standing there staring at nothing. Finally, I set the ice cream on the counter and walked toward Lily's bedroom. Her door was half open. She sat cross-legged on the floor, still wearing her yellow cardigan. Surrounded by colored pencils and homework papers she clearly was not working on. The room smelled faintly like strawberry shampoo and the lavender spray she liked using on her pillows before bed. Normal little girl things. Things children should be worrying about instead of carrying adult shame they do not understand. "Can I come in?" I asked softly. Lily nodded. I sat carefully beside her on the carpet. For a while neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her backpack slowly and pulled out something folded neatly between her school folders. "A photograph. Grandma gave me this last week," she whispered. I took it carefully. It was an old family photograph taken years before I met Daniel. Margaret stood beside teenage Daniel in front of the Holloway Lake house, smiling proudly, while several relatives crowded around them. On the back, written in sharp blue ink, were the words, "Real family protects its name." My stomach tightened. "Why would she give you this?" Lily picked nervously at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Because I asked why there were no baby pictures of me in the hallway anymore." I looked up sharply. "What did she say?" Lily swallowed hard. "She told me some people get added to families by mistake." The room suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled softly beyond the apartment windows, even though the weather report had promised clear skies tonight. I stared at the photograph again. Margaret had not simply been trying to humiliate Lily today. She had been preparing her for something. Slowly, deliberately, like she wanted my daughter to believe she did not belong before whatever came next finally happened. Then Lily said something that made every nerve in my body go cold. "Mom," she whispered carefully. "Grandma said Dad knows the truth too." After Lily fell asleep that night, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the old photograph Margaret had given her. The apartment was silent except for the ticking wall clock above the stove and the occasional sound of rain tapping lightly against the windows. I had turned off every lamp except the small one over the sink, and in the dim yellow light the words on the back of the picture seemed harsher somehow. "Real family protects its name." I traced my thumb slowly over Margaret's handwriting. Even after all these years, I recognized the sharp slant of every letter instantly. During my marriage to Daniel, Margaret used to leave handwritten notes throughout the house whenever she visited. Tiny corrections disguised as kindness. Towels folded incorrectly. Wine glasses stored in the wrong cabinet. One time she rewrote my grocery list because she said my handwriting looked too emotional. Back then I laughed it off because Daniel always insisted that was simply how his mother showed love. Looking back now, I wondered how many warnings I ignored because I wanted our marriage to work badly enough to excuse anything. I stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway closet where I kept old storage boxes stacked beneath winter coats and extra blankets. It took me several minutes to find the faded gray container marked Holloway documents in black marker. I had not opened it since the divorce 3 years earlier. Dust coated the lid. For a moment, I almost pushed it back into the closet. Some part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation for everything. Some misunderstanding that would make this nightmare feel less deliberate. But then I remembered Lily standing beside the hydrangea bushes with that sign around her neck while adults looked away, pretending not to notice. I carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside were years of paperwork I could never bring myself to throw away. Mortgage records from the old house in Fairfield County. Lily's elementary school registration forms. Copies of our divorce settlement. Family Christmas cards tied together with pale blue ribbon. I began sorting through the papers slowly while rain continued falling outside. Around midnight, I found the envelope. Thin cream-colored paper with Daniel's name written across the front in Margaret's handwriting. My chest tightened immediately because I recognized the date in the upper corner. October 17th. 10 years ago. 2 months before Lily was born. My fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside was a folded medical document and a handwritten note clipped together. The note came first. Daniel, I told you this child would destroy everything if you allowed Claire to trap you with it. There are still ways to protect this family before it is too late. Your mother. I read the words twice before my eyes shifted toward the document underneath. It was a laboratory request form from a private medical office in Hartford. Partial prenatal DNA consultation. The rest of the page had been ripped away. My heartbeat slowed strangely instead of speeding up. The kind of cold calm that arrives when fear becomes too large to fully process. I searched the box more aggressively after that. Papers slid across the table. Old receipts fluttered onto the kitchen floor. Somewhere around 1 a.m, I found another envelope hidden beneath our old insurance records. This one contained several photographs from the final months of my pregnancy. In every picture, Margaret stood slightly apart from me, smiling politely but never touching my stomach, never looking directly at me. I remembered how distant she became after I announced I was pregnant. At the time, Daniel said she was simply worried because his father had died unexpectedly that same year. But now memories started rearranging themselves differently inside my mind. The whispered arguments I overheard downstairs after my baby shower. The sudden tension whenever Lily's name came up before she was born. The night I woke up 7 months pregnant and found Daniel sitting alone in the garage staring at paperwork he hid the second he saw me. Dad knows the truth too. Lily's words repeated quietly through my head. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Across the apartment, the heating system clicked softly on and then off again. Suddenly, another memory surfaced. Lily's 3rd birthday party. Margaret had arrived late carrying an expensive silver bracelet for Daniel instead of a gift for Lily. When I asked jokingly where Lily's present was, Margaret smiled calmly and said, "Some people celebrate bloodlines differently." At the time, everyone laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. Even me. Especially me. Because deep down I think I already sensed something was wrong long before tonight. I just did not want to know how wrong. My phone buzzed suddenly against the table, making me jump. Daniel. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Claire. His voice sounded low and tense. My mother is upset about tonight. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Not loudly. Just once. Sharp and exhausted. Silence filled the line for a moment. Lily is upset too, I said finally. Daniel exhaled heavily. Mom thinks you are putting ideas into her head. I looked down at the torn laboratory form still resting beside my hand. Interesting, I said quietly, because I was just wondering who has been putting ideas into yours for the last 10 years. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear faint television noise somewhere in the background at his house. Then Daniel spoke more quietly than before. You should stop digging into old things, Claire. My grip tightened around the phone. Why? I asked. Because you will not like what you find. For the first time since our divorce, Daniel sounded afraid. Some secrets protect people, he said softly. Then he hung up. The next morning, I barely slept more than 2 hours before sunlight started creeping through the thin blinds above my kitchen sink. My head ached from staring at old paperwork. Half the night, but the exhaustion sitting in my chest felt heavier than lack of sleep. It felt like grief. Not for my marriage. That grief ended years ago. This felt deeper. Like mourning a version of reality I had trusted for over a decade. Lily was still asleep when I quietly gathered the papers from the kitchen table into neat stacks again. The torn laboratory form. Margaret's handwritten note. The old photographs. I kept staring at the date on the DNA consultation request. October 17th. 10 years ago. Back when I was 7 months pregnant and still believed Daniel and I were building a future together. I remembered painting Lily's nursery pale green because Daniel said yellow felt too bright for a baby room. I remembered spending entire Saturdays searching antique stores for a rocking chair Margaret claimed had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. I remembered how lonely those final months of pregnancy suddenly became without understanding why. Daniel stopped touching my stomach after October. He stopped talking about baby names. Some nights he stayed in his office until 2 a.m, while Margaret conveniently visited more often than ever before. At the time, I blamed stress, grief, work pressure. I blamed everything except what now sat folded on my kitchen table. Around 8:30, Lily wandered into the kitchen wearing oversized pajama pants and carrying the stuffed rabbit she still slept with despite insisting last year she was too old for stuffed animals. Her blonde curls were tangled from sleep, and dark circles rested faintly beneath her eyes. Seeing them made something inside me harden quietly. Children should not lose sleep worrying whether they belong in their own family. "Do you want pancakes?" I asked softly. She nodded and climbed onto one of the counter stools without speaking. Usually Lily talked constantly in the mornings. About books she wanted from the library. About science projects. About whether our neighbor's dog looked sad lately. But now silence seemed to follow her everywhere. I mixed pancake batter slowly while she watched raindrops slide down the apartment window. "Mom," she asked after several minutes, "did Grandma hate me before I was born?" The whisk stopped moving in my hand. I turned toward her carefully. "Why would you ask that?" Lily shrugged without looking at me. "Because she always looks at me like she already knows something bad." I swallowed hard. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and butter warming in the skillet. But suddenly, even familiar things felt fragile. "You did nothing to deserve the way she treats you," I said quietly. "Nothing." Lily nodded slightly, though again I could tell she was trying to decide whether she believed me. Before I could say anything else, my phone buzzed against the counter. Unknown number. Normally I ignored calls like that, but something in my chest tightened immediately. I answered carefully. "Claire Bennett," a woman asked. Her voice sounded older. Controlled. "Yes." A small pause followed. "This is Rebecca Holloway." I almost dropped the phone. Rebecca was Daniel's aunt, Margaret's younger sister. We had not spoken in nearly 4 years. Not since the divorce finalized, and the Holloway family quietly chose Margaret's side in everything. Rebecca had always been different from the rest of them, though. Softer somehow. Less interested in appearances. When Lily was little, Rebecca used to take her blueberry picking every August and send handwritten birthday cards with $5 bills taped inside. Margaret once called her embarrassingly sentimental during Thanksgiving dinner. "I know this is sudden," Rebecca said carefully, "but I think we need to talk." My eyes drifted toward the papers on the table. "About what?" Another pause. Longer this time. "About what Margaret did yesterday," she said quietly, "and about what she has been hiding for years." An hour later, after dropping Lily at summer art camp, I drove 20 minutes north to a small diner just outside Milford where Rebecca asked to meet. The place looked untouched since the 1980s. Red vinyl booths, coffee mugs with chipped edges, a tired waitress refilling cream dispensers near the counter. Rebecca sat alone in the far corner wearing a pale gray sweater despite the humid weather. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile, but when she saw me approaching, guilt flashed across her face so clearly that my stomach immediately tightened. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I slid into the booth across from her without smiling. "You said Margaret has been hiding something." Rebecca wrapped both hands around her untouched coffee cup. "Claire," she began carefully, "there are things I should have told you years ago." Outside the diner windows, rainwater still clung to parked cars beneath the cloudy July sky. Rebecca looked exhausted, like someone who had spent too many years carrying something heavy alone. "When you got pregnant," she continued quietly, "Margaret became obsessed with the baby." I frowned slightly. "Obsessed how?" Rebecca looked down at the table. She was convinced the child was not Daniel's. My chest tightened immediately. "Why?" Rebecca hesitated. "Because Daniel told her something during a fight." My voice lowered. "What kind of fight?" Rebecca finally met my eyes. "Daniel admitted he had been seeing someone else briefly before your pregnancy." The diner suddenly felt too warm, too small. I stared at her without speaking while she continued carefully. "Margaret convinced herself that if Daniel could betray you, then you must have betrayed him too." My fingers curled slowly against the edge of the booth seat. "That is insane." "I know," Rebecca whispered. "But your mother-in-law cared more about protecting the Holloway name than protecting reality." She swallowed hard before adding the sentence that made my blood run cold. "And Claire, I think she forged something." For several seconds, I could not speak. The waitress passed our booth carrying a tray of coffee cups while an old country song played softly through the diner speakers. But Rebecca's last sentence seemed to drown everything else out. "I think she forged something." Rebecca looked pale after saying it, like even now she was afraid Margaret might somehow overhear us from miles away. I leaned back slowly against the booth seat and folded my arms tightly across my chest. "What exactly do you mean forged?" Rebecca glanced nervously toward the windows before lowering her voice further. I never saw the document myself, she admitted. But about a month before Lily was born, Margaret came to my house very upset. She said she had proof the baby was not Daniel's. My stomach twisted immediately. What kind of proof? She would not tell me. Rebecca rubbed her fingers together anxiously. But she kept saying she finally had what she needed to protect the family. Outside, gray clouds hung low over the diner parking lot, while rainwater dripped slowly from the roof gutters. Everything felt strangely still. Daniel never accused me of cheating, I said quietly. Not once. Rebecca nodded sadly. That is because I do not think he fully believed it either. I stared at her. Then why did he let this continue for 10 years? Rebecca's eyes softened with something that looked painfully close to pity. Because Daniel has spent his whole life terrified of disappointing your mother-in-law. I almost corrected her automatically before remembering Margaret technically was not my mother-in-law anymore. But the truth was, divorce had never fully separated her influence from my life. Margaret Holloway still moved through it quietly like smoke under a locked door. Rebecca took a careful sip of coffee before continuing. After your wedding, Margaret started treating Daniel less like a son and more like an investment. She controlled everything. His internships, his friendships, even which law school he attended. Daniel was 32 when Lily was born, I said sharply. He was not a child. No, Rebecca replied softly. But some people never stop being managed. Her words settled heavily between us. Deep down, I knew she was right. During our marriage, Daniel rarely made decisions without first speaking to Margaret. What color to paint the kitchen, which preschool Lily should attend, whether we should refinance the house after my teaching contract ended. I used to joke that I married both of them. But now those memories no longer felt harmless. They felt dangerous. There is something else, Rebecca said carefully. My chest tightened again. The week before you gave birth, Margaret contacted a private investigator. I blinked slowly. What? Rebecca nodded once. I found out afterward because she accidentally mailed one of the invoices to my address instead of hers. I felt physically cold despite the warm diner air. Why would she hire a private investigator? Rebecca hesitated. To follow you. I stared at her without breathing for a moment. That is impossible. I wish it were. She looked genuinely ashamed now. Claire, she became obsessed. She convinced herself you had trapped Daniel with another man's child. My mind flashed suddenly to all the strange moments during my pregnancy. The parked sedan outside my apartment building several nights in a row. Margaret unexpectedly appearing at my doctor's office, once claiming she happened to be nearby. Daniel accusing me during one argument of being distant lately, even though he was the one sleeping on the downstairs couch by then. At the time, none of it made sense together. Now it did. Horribly. I never cheated on Daniel. I whispered. Rebecca reached across the table and gently touched my hand. I know. Something inside me cracked then. Not loudly. Quietly. The kind of break that happens after carrying disbelief too long. And Lily has spent her whole childhood paying for Margaret's paranoia, I said. Rebecca lowered her eyes because neither of us could deny it. The waitress arrived briefly with a coffee refill neither of us asked for. We both thanked her automatically. Normal manners surviving inside completely abnormal conversations. After she walked away, Rebecca reached carefully into her purse and removed a small sealed envelope. My pulse immediately quickened. What is that? Rebecca slid it slowly across the table toward me. I found this in Margaret's study last winter while helping organize old files after her surgery. My fingers hesitated before touching the envelope. The paper felt thick and expensive beneath my hand. Why are you giving this to me now? Rebecca looked exhausted suddenly. Older than before. Because what she did to Lily crossed a line even Margaret cannot walk back from. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded laboratory report dated 10 years earlier. The top half contained official medical formatting from a genetics clinic in Hartford. But what caught my attention immediately was the bold-typed sentence near the center of the page. Probability of paternity excluded. My vision blurred for a second before I noticed something else. The document listed a patient name. Not mine. Another woman entirely. I looked up sharply at Rebecca. This is not about me. Exactly, she whispered. Margaret showed that report to Daniel and claimed it was yours. My stomach dropped so suddenly I thought I might be sick. She switched the names? Rebecca nodded slowly. I believe she covered the original patient information and photocopied the rest. I stared down at the paper again. Even through the blur of old copier ink, I could see faint marks where another name had likely once existed beneath correction tape. Daniel never checked. I whispered. Rebecca's silence answered for her. I leaned back against the booth feeling hollow. 10 years. 10 years of subtle cruelty toward my daughter because one woman decided suspicion mattered more than truth. Then Rebecca said something that made my chest tighten all over again. Claire, I do not think Daniel knows the report was fake. When I left the diner that afternoon, the rain had finally stopped, but the air outside still felt heavy and wet against my skin. I sat inside my car for several minutes without turning the engine on. Rebecca's envelope rested on the passenger seat beside me, and every time I looked at it, I felt like my entire past shifted slightly further out of place. Daniel had spent 10 years believing there was proof Lily was not his daughter. Margaret had spent 10 years turning that lie into punishment. And somewhere in the middle of all of it sat my little girl wondering if she deserved to belong anywhere at all. I finally started the car and drove towards Cedar Grove with the windows cracked slightly open. Traffic moved slowly along the interstate while gray clouds drifted across the afternoon sky. Normally during drives like this, I listened to podcasts or old country music stations to fill the silence. Today I drove in complete quiet. My mind kept replaying one sentence over and over. I do not think Daniel knows the report was fake. Part of me wanted to hate him. Completely after hearing that. It would have been easier. Cleaner somehow. But another part remembered the way he looked at Lily when she was born. I remembered him crying quietly in the hospital chair while holding her tiny hand for the first time. I remembered him painting stars on her nursery ceiling because he said every child deserved something beautiful to fall asleep under. Those memories did not match the man who stood silently beside a grill while his mother humiliated our daughter. Somewhere between those two versions of Daniel, something had gone terribly wrong. When I arrived at the apartment complex, Lily was already back from art camp sitting on the curb outside building 2B beside Mrs. Hernandez from downstairs. The old woman waved warmly the second she saw my car. Your daughter helped me carry groceries, she called cheerfully. Lily stood slowly, clutching her backpack against her chest. There was still a sadness around her eyes that had not been there a week ago. Children changed quickly after humiliation. That realization made my throat tighten painfully. Upstairs in the apartment, Lily spread colored pencils across the kitchen table while working quietly on a drawing assignment from camp. Usually she showed me every sketch immediately. Today she kept turning the paper slightly away whenever I walked past. Around 6 o'clock, while I stirred tomato soup on the stove, she finally spoke without looking up. Dad called me earlier. I stopped moving the spoon. What did he want? He asked if I was still upset. She pressed harder against the paper with her pencil. I said yes. I waited carefully. What did he say? Lily shrugged. He said families say things they do not mean sometimes. A sharp sadness moved through me then because that sentence sounded exactly like something Daniel would tell himself in order to survive growing up with Margaret. I carried 2 bowls of soup to the table and sat beside Lily quietly. After several minutes, she pushed the drawing toward me without speaking. My chest tightened instantly. It was our apartment building drawn in colored pencil beneath a dark sky. Tiny yellow windows glowed warmly inside the sketch. Lily had drawn herself and me standing together outside the entrance holding hands. But farther away, near the edge of the page, she had drawn a large, empty white house with dark windows and no people inside. The Holloway estate. Even in a child's drawing, it looked cold. This is beautiful, I whispered honestly. Lily traced one finger along the edge of the paper. Mrs. Green at camp said art shows how people feel inside. I looked at the empty house again. How do you feel inside? Lily thought for several seconds before answering. Like Grandma wants everybody to forget me. Her voice stayed calm while saying it, which somehow hurt even more. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. That is never going to happen. Lily looked down at our hands for a moment. Mom, yes. If Dad thought I was not really his daughter, she hesitated carefully. Why did he still come to my school plays and dance recitals? The question caught me completely off guard because children notice contradictions adults hope they miss. I stared at her for several seconds before answering honestly. Because somewhere inside him, he loves you very much. Lily frowned slightly. Then why does he let Grandma act like this? I opened my mouth immediately, but no answer came out. Because I did not fully understand it myself. Not yet. That night after Lily went to bed, I sat alone on the living room couch with Rebecca's envelopes spread open beside me again. Rainwater still clung to the apartment windows while the television played muted late-night commercials in the background. I kept studying the copied laboratory report, the correction marks, the mismatch formatting, tiny clues I missed because I never knew the document existed before now. Then suddenly something else caught my attention near the bottom corner of the page. A signature, Dr. Leonard Keller. The name stirred something faintly familiar in my memory. I stood immediately and walked toward the hallway closet again, where the old storage box remained open from the night before. After several minutes of searching through medical folders and insurance paperwork, I finally found it. Lily's original birth records from St. Catherine's Hospital. Attached to the neonatal paperwork was a pediatric referral form signed by the same doctor, Dr. Leonard Keller. My pulse quickened. If he handled both the supposed DNA consultation and Lily's birth records, then maybe somewhere there were original files. Real files, not Margaret's version of them. I stared at the signature while the apartment remained completely silent around me. Then I reached slowly for my phone. Because for the first time in 10 years, I realized the truth might still exist somewhere untouched. The next morning, I called St. Catherine's Hospital 3 times before someone finally transferred me to medical records. By then, Lily had already left for art camp wearing denim overalls and carrying the sketchbook Mrs. Hernandez bought her from the pharmacy downstairs. Before leaving, she hugged me a little longer than usual. Children always know when adults are carrying storms inside them. "Will everything be okay?" she asked quietly at the apartment door. I forced a small smile and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. "I think we are finally going to find out the truth." She nodded slowly, though worry still lingered in her eyes before she disappeared down the hallway toward the elevator. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in notes. Dates, names, questions. For the first time in years, I no longer felt confused. Hurt, yes. Furious, absolutely. But confusion had finally started giving way to clarity. Margaret Holloway had built her entire life around controlling narratives. She decided who belonged, who embarrassed the family, who deserved warmth, and who deserved exile. And for 10 years, everyone around her had adjusted themselves to survive inside that version of reality, including Daniel. Medical Records Department. The woman on the phone repeated politely, "How may I help you?" I took a slow breath. "I am trying to request archived neonatal records connected to Dr. Leonard Keller from approximately 10 years ago." Papers shuffled faintly on the other end. "Those records would likely be stored off-site now. Is there any way to access them?" Another pause. "Possibly, but we would need authorization forms." I glanced down at Lily's birth certificate resting beside my notes. "I am the mother listed on the records." The woman softened slightly after that. "All right, let me see what can be located." 40 minutes later, after answering security questions and emailing copies of identification documents, I finally hung up with a promise that someone would contact me within 2 business days. 2 days suddenly felt unbearable. I spent the afternoon cleaning the apartment simply because I needed my hands busy. I folded laundry, organized kitchen drawers, watered the dying basil plant near the windowsill that Lily kept insisting would recover. Every quiet task gave my thoughts too much room to move. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen without responding immediately. A second message followed almost instantly. "Mom says you have been speaking to Rebecca." Of course she knew already. Information traveled through the Holloway family like electricity through wires. I typed slowly. "Rebecca told me enough." Several minutes passed before Daniel finally called instead. I answered, but said nothing first. His breathing filled the line for a moment before he spoke. "Claire, whatever Rebecca said, you need to understand she has always exaggerated things." I walked slowly toward the apartment window overlooking the parking lot below. "Did your mother show you a DNA report when I was pregnant?" Silence. Not defensive silence. Cornered silence. "Daniel." His voice dropped lower. "Yes." My chest tightened painfully even though I already knew the answer. "And you believed it?" Another long pause. I did not want to. I closed my eyes briefly. Down below, Mrs. Hernandez struggled gently with grocery bags near her car, while 2 neighborhood boys rode bicycles past the dumpsters laughing loudly. Ordinary life continuing while mine rearranged itself sentence by sentence. "But you still treated Lily differently after that." I whispered. No, his response came too quickly. Too emotional. I never stopped loving her. Then why did you let your mother humiliate her? The line went quiet again. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice sounded exhausted in a way I had never heard before. Because every time I tried to push back, my mother reminded me what that report said. I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the window. And you never thought to verify it yourself? Claire, his voice cracked slightly. You have to understand what things were like back then. Anger rose slowly inside me then. Cold and steady. No, I said quietly. You have to understand what things were like for us. He exhaled shakily. I know I failed, Lily. You failed yourself too. Silence again. Then finally, very softly, Daniel said something that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. I used to sit outside her bedroom at night after she was born and count how many times she breathed. I swallowed hard without answering. I kept telling myself no man would do that for a child he did not believe was his, he continued. But every time I confronted my mother, she would show me copies of the report again. Copies, not originals. My stomach turned immediately. How many copies? I asked sharply. Daniel hesitated. 3, I think. My pulse quickened. Margaret had reproduced the lie repeatedly. Carefully. Deliberately. Daniel, I said slowly. Did you ever notice the patient name on the report? Silence fell so heavily between us that I already knew the answer before he spoke. No. I turned away from the window. Rebecca gave me one of the copies. Another silence. Then his breathing changed completely. Sharper now. Uneven. What? The patient information belongs to another woman. Nothing. Not even breathing now. Just empty, stunned quiet on the other end of the line. Finally, Daniel whispered one sentence so softly I almost did not hear it. My God. 3 days later, Daniel stood outside apartment 2B holding a manila envelope against his chest like it weighed 50 pounds. Through the peephole, he looked older than he had just a week earlier. His posture sagged slightly. His eyes were hollow from lack of sleep. For several seconds, I considered not opening the door at all. But then Lily appeared quietly beside me wearing fuzzy socks and holding a bowl of popcorn from movie night. Is it Dad? She whispered. I nodded once. Lily looked toward the door silently before stepping back into the living room without another word. That hurt more than anything else. Children should never learn emotional distance before middle school. I opened the door slowly. Daniel's eyes met mine for only a second before dropping toward the envelope in his hands. St. Catherine's called me this morning, he said quietly. My pulse tightened immediately. And he swallowed hard. The original records still existed. Neither of us moved for a moment. The hallway behind him smelled faintly like someone's laundry detergent drifting from another apartment. Ordinary details trying unsuccessfully to soften extraordinary damage. Finally, I stepped aside silently and let him enter. Daniel sat carefully at the kitchen table while I remained standing near the sink. The same table where Lily colored pictures. The same table where I spent nights sorting through lies disguised as paperwork. Daniel placed the envelope down between us, but did not open it immediately. His hands trembled slightly. I had never seen Daniel Holloway look afraid before. I met with Dr. Keller this afternoon, he said softly. He retired 2 years ago, but the hospital contacted him after the record's request. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. What did he say? Daniel closed his eyes briefly before answering. The DNA consultation Margaret showed me was never connected to you. Even hearing the words spoken aloud made my stomach twist painfully. 10 years. 10 entire years built around a lie one woman manufactured because suspicion mattered more to her than truth. Daniel slowly opened the envelope and removed several photocopied records. One paper slid across the table toward me. Official hospital verification confirming that no prenatal paternity concerns had ever existed in my medical file. Another page confirmed the laboratory report Margaret provided years earlier belonged to an unrelated patient entirely. I stared at the documents quietly while Daniel spoke in a voice that sounded smaller than I had ever heard before. Dr. Keller said my mother requested duplicate copies. Repeatedly during your pregnancy. She claimed she was organizing family medical paperwork. His jaw tightened painfully. He trusted her. I looked down at the table for several seconds before asking the question sitting heaviest inside my chest. Did you confront her? Daniel gave a slow nod. Outside the apartment windows, evening sunlight stretched across the parking lot in long gold lines, while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond Cedar Grove. She denied everything at first, he said quietly. Then she said she only wanted to protect me. I closed my eyes briefly because of course Margaret framed cruelty as love. People like her always did. Protect you from what? Daniel laughed once under his breath. Empty and exhausted. Embarrassment. Gossip. Public humiliation. He looked up at me finally. She said powerful families survive by controlling the narrative before someone else does. I thought immediately about Lily standing beside those hydrangea bushes with that sign around her neck, while relatives avoided eye contact. Margaret had not just controlled narratives. She had sacrificed a child to maintain one. And what did you say? I asked quietly. Daniel stared down at his wedding ring for a long moment before answering. I asked her how she could look at Lily every Christmas knowing what she had done. Silence settled heavily between us. Then he whispered the sentence that finally broke whatever remained between him and the family he spent his life protecting. She said children recover from confusion faster than adults recover from shame. My chest tightened painfully. For the first time since all of this began, I saw complete clarity settle across Daniel's face. Not confusion. Not guilt disguised as loyalty. Actual clarity. And somehow that made everything sadder. I should have protected her, he whispered. I looked toward the living room where Lily sat curled beneath a blanket watching cartoons softly, with Mrs. Hernandez's old orange cat asleep beside her. Safe. Small. Innocent. Yes, I said honestly. Daniel nodded once like he deserved that answer. Because he did. We sat in silence for several moments before he carefully reached into the envelope again and pulled out one final item. The original forged report Margaret copied years ago. Yellowed now with age. Correction tape still visible beneath harsh copier lines. Daniel stared at it for a long time before speaking quietly. I kept this hidden in my office safe for 10 years. His voice cracked slightly. Every birthday. Every dance recital. Every school picture. Some part of me kept hearing my mother's voice telling me not to trust what I loved. I swallowed hard but said nothing. Because there are some wounds apologies cannot immediately reach. Finally, Daniel stood slowly from the kitchen table and walked toward the living room doorway. Lily looked up from the couch cautiously when she saw him. For one horrible second, I worried she might pull away from him entirely. But Daniel knelt carefully beside the couch instead. Lily, he said softly, I need to tell you something very important. She stared at him quietly while the cartoon flickered colorful light across the room. Daniel's eyes filled with tears before he even finished the sentence. There was never anything wrong with you. Not ever. Lily blinked several times. Then why did Grandma say those things? Daniel lowered his head briefly like the weight of that question physically hurt. When he finally looked back at her, his voice sounded steady for the first time all week. Because sometimes adults care more about protecting their pride than protecting people. Lily was silent for several seconds before quietly climbing off the couch and walking toward the kitchen trash can. She reached inside her backpack slowly and pulled out the folded sign she had kept since the reunion. Family Disgrace. Without speaking, she dropped it gently into the trash. Then she walked back toward the couch, curled beneath her blanket again, and leaned her head against her father's shoulder while rain finally started falling softly outside the apartment windows.